Disclaimer. Hello, this space is where I have transformed the debris of my past into the architecture of my present. I share my journey of deconstruction and rebuilding as a form of a creative advocacy. Specifically, how I shattered the 3 mirrors of my history to reclaim my own reflection. Please note, while I share this story to offer perspective, I am a chronicler of my own experience, not a mental health professional. My focus here is on the evolution of the self and the intentional life I am building today. Thank you for respecting the boundaries of this space and for focusing on the journey of growth rather than the gravity of the past. Eliza and the Trio Mirrors. Part 1. The Illusion of the Warped Mirrors. To understand the sunshine, it is important first to understand the depth of a cave. Eliza's identity was defined and shaped by distinctive warped mirrors in a damp, dark cave that were never meant to show her true reflection or see the light. One was created by her father, the second by a lifelong religious cult, and the third, her marriage. Each of these mirrors perceived a limitation for Eliza. It would also break for her future. The first was a mirror created by her father that looked at a young girl and found fault in the very way she was naturally made, weaponizing her physical appearance, opinions, gentle heart, and controlling who she was. Her unique perspective made her mind feel filtered, as if she was flawed from the moment she entered the world. Born after an academically successful sister, it was a mirror that only offered value if she were smaller, quieter, and born a male. This creator of the mirror would wear masks in the world. In the business world, he wore a mask of sharp capability. In the religious environment, he was a well-suited family man. But Eliza grew to see the reality, the truth. His supposed intellect was nothing more than a mask. It was a deliberate illusion, a theater of manipulation and fear used to dominate both his marriage, his family, and the enterprises he controlled. Breaking the mirror started 9 years ago. The mirror was so overbearing in the damp, dark cave, reflecting her uselessness, with no merit in life, no purpose, and not worthy of love. It was the first crack that cosmetically altered this mirror. She saw the ugliness of manipulation, the neglect, and the hollow authority of her father. This poor reflection in the mirror was so forceful and absolute that her body and her mind reached a point of being crushed in the depths of this cave. She was burned out from 30-plus years of all that she was emotionally, mentally, and as a person, purpose, as a daughter. For everything she had done at this point in her life was approval of her father, to be loved, to be respected, and above all, in fear. Eliza chose not only to break that mirror, but also to crawl her way out of the dark, damp, deep cave of her entire world, rewriting her destiny. The deepest work of the soul was still waiting for this moment, her beginning. She cut the cord to the mirror, her father, with heartache, confusion, and being utterly lost. She sought the sunlight and stepped into the unknown, the outskirts of her cave. Part 2. The Spiritual Cleansing and Ground Zero. For the entirety of existence, Eliza had known only one spiritual and social ecosystem, a tightly controlled, highly manipulative religious cult. It was an environment built on the architecture of fear, where compliance was dressed up as a virtue, and identifying as a woman, independent thought, was valued as a betrayal. Within that system, her marriage became another prison, a mirrored room of narcissistic control, where her boundaries were systematically eroded. 4 years ago, that pressure inside that cage reached its absolute breaking point. She looked at her husband, recognized his narcissism consuming her life, the emotional abuse, and took the ultimate terrifying initiative. she walked away to seek to live. Eliza looked at the religion she had known since birth. She looked at the fear that had been instilled into her, and she saw it for what it truly was. Today, she is completely, rightfully divorced from that narcissist, leaving him and his control in the dust of her past, an expected cult to follow. For decades, the blueprints of Eliza's life were drawn by hands that wanted her invisible. When she walked away, she inherited an empty plot of land. Standing on this property, she reflects that she is designing for herself with anxiety and doubt. But it is no longer about meeting an expectation or earning a false sense of worth. Every step on her property is a beam she lays with her own tuned hands. This is the sanctuary of her absolute sovereignty. Leaving the cult wasn't just an exit. It was a profound spiritual house cleansing. By walking away from the artificial fear-based dogma that had weaponized the divine against her, Eliza opened the door to her true spiritual calling and purpose. It was a clearing of fear. In the vacuum where anxiety used to live, an unshakable, empowering spiritual connection bloomed. And it was here, in the absolute safety of this hard-won freedom, that the real magic began. With no support from a traditional family, she became her own fierce architect. This was the true beginning of her inner child healing. She sat down in the quiet ruins of her old cave, held the hand of the little girl who had been told she was never enough, and began the slow, agonizingly gentle work of building her self-confidence entirely from scratch. Part 3, the 19-year sanctuary. Through every network of caves without much light, aiming for the sunshine, Eliza not only broke the mirrors, but crawled forward. Through the burnouts, the isolation, the abuse, and the fracturing of her old world of all that she had known, there was one constant golden thread that never broke: her relationship with the culinary arts. 19 years ago, Eliza started her gourmet journey. It didn't begin just as a hobby. It began as a foundational pillar of her confidence. A single book she found at a library that captivated her interest and opened a dam of opportunities. When the people she leaned on told her she was non-existent or valueless, the kitchen was the only place where she could prove her own capability to herself. In that space, she was the creator, she was the artist, and she thrived vibrantly. Over nearly 2 decades, her relationship and knowledge of food enhanced, developed, and transformed into a deeply committed bond. It became her sanctuary. No matter how chaotic the outside world became, no matter what her father or her ex-husband tried to strip away or discourage, they could never touch her culinary mastery. In the soft modern sanctuary she built for herself, she took back the pieces of her identity that had been stolen or distorted. She took the organizational skills and sharp business ethics she had learned in her youth, completely stripped away her father's cruelty and misogyny, and claimed those talents as her own sovereign property, creating her power. And then she did something even more radical. She decided to go back to college on her own terms. At this point in her life, she completely dismantled her father's toxic manipulative metrics for success. Within 2 years of immense dedication, study, and academic honors, a profound realization bloomed. As she engaged with her mass communication studies, the old lie of her unworthiness completely dissolved. She looked at her brilliant intellect, her deep value, and her profound wisdom and realized they had actually been there the entire time. They were her birthright. They had simply been waiting for the noise of her past to clear so they could finally be heard. Part 4, The Instinct of the Guide. Today, Eliza's life is an embodied masterclass in self-worth. Over the years, people who crossed her path noticed something distinct about her. They repeatedly told her she could be a teacher, a counselor, a guide. They could see an innate wisdom of her that defied the hardships she had faced. And they were right. The girl who could easily protect her classmates from bullies decades ago had grown into a woman with a rare, almost supernatural ability. Eliza possesses an immediate, instinctual radar for the silent sufferers of the world. Because she lived it, she could look into a crowded room and instantly spot the individuals who are quietly enduring the suffocating weight of abuse, neglect, heartache, and the struggles of life and the ones who give it. She recognizes the subtle, exhausting toll of dealing with narcissists, controllers, and emotional manipulators. She understands the precise, exhausting vocabulary of walking on eggshells. Her advocacy is born from this exact space. When she connects with people in her community, she isn't speaking from a textbook. She's speaking as a survivor who walked through the teeth of the gale and came out sovereign. Her message is a lifelong for those who still trapped in the silence. You hold the power within you. Your worth is non-negotiable, and it cannot be granted or stripped away by the people who desperately try to control you. She doesn't carry people across the finish line. Instead, she stands beside them as the ultimate counselor and protector, helping them realize that they already have the strength to take their own great leaps of faith. Part 5, The Sovereign Light. The ink has dried on the old chapters. The stories of neglect, the constraints of the cult, the narcissistic marriage, and the demands of a fraudulent legacy still exist in the timeline of her past, but they no longer hold the pen. Eliza sits in her quiet home, looking out at a world that she claimed with her own 2 hands. She is 41 years old, a brilliant student of communication, a master of a 19-year culinary journey, a mother, a partner, and a spiritual guide to those finding their way out of the dark. The inner child and teenager she spent the last 4 years gently raising is finally safe, playing in the sunlight of a life built on an absolute, unvarnished truth. The past wanted her to be non-existent. The old systems wanted her to be compliant. But Eliza chose to shine so brightly that the shadows had no choice but to retreat. She knows her intellect. She owns her wisdom. She holds her power. And the table she is building now is a sanctuary for anyone ready to take a leap of faith, step into their own light, and finally realize that their value was inside them all along.